Back again.
Yeah. Hey, I'm Kyle Godby.
I'm Jen Brizelli, and we decided we're going to actually say our names at the beginning of these recorded conversations. So
We're
there we did it.
formalizing. Yeah. And this is Field Notes from the Swamp. So since we're calling it now, let's talk about the swamp. Why did we go with swamp?
Yeah. And conveniently, I happen to have a quote handy from Donald Schon. It's from The Reflective Practitioner. And I'm going to just read it. You cool with that?
Do it, do it, do it.
In the varied topography of professional practice, there is a high, hard ground where practitioners can make effective use of research-based theory and technique, and there is a swampy lowland where situations are confusing messes incapable of technical solution. The difficulty is that the problems of the high, hard ground, however great their technical interest, are often relatively unimportant to clients or to the larger society, while in the swamp are the problems of greatest human concern. Shall the practitioner stay on the high, hard ground where he can practice rigorously, as he understands rigor, but where he is constrained to deal with problems of relatively little social importance? Or shall he descend to the swamp where he can engage the most important and challenging problems if he is willing to forsake technical rigor? There are those who choose the swampy lowlands. And when I hear this line, I think of someone literally starting to play their like inspiring music. There are those who choose the swampy lowlands. They deliberately involve themselves in messy but crucially important problems. And when asked to describe their methods of inquiry, they speak of experience, trial and error, intuition, and muddling through.
I like it. It reminds, before I found this, I think this might have come up or some past conversation, but it reminds me of before finding that there was any methodologies around this, anyone else toiling in this space, the amount of time that I spent staring at whiteboards, just mashing at stuff, trying to make sense of, I've got this information, I'm being forced to misrepresent it in the sort of patterns that, or the frameworks that I have available, the tools that I've got available.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sleep at night if I'm going to misrepresent this. So now what? I've got to break this, and constantly I'll tweak something. Let me grab somebody and have them look at it, have them say, this doesn't make any sense to me. What about this? And like, damn, back to the drawing board kind of stuff.
Yep.
Wile E. Coyote. Constantly going off the cliff, trying something new, trying to figure something out there, and a lot of failed experiments.
Yeah,
a lot of soot on my face. Yeah, exactly.
Muddling through. I mean, I love this quote. My origins around this, at least my first intersection with it, was at some point in education before I moved into the world of design and complexity and systems and stuff. I don't remember when or how or where I was introduced to Don Schon's work, but I read the Reflective Practitioner. It might have been in some coursework or professional work related to action research, reflective, research in practice, all of these like kind of things that swirl together. But of course, I re-encountered it again in grad school and in the world of design. But this particular passage spoke to me right away for many of the reasons I think it speaks to a lot of people. However, it does make me itchy, excuse me, in one way, which is I think it does set up a false dichotomy. I mean, he's writing to build contrast, to make his point about the swampy lowlands, about muddling through, about, what later people talk about as like technical versus adaptive problems and whatever. But I don't love that it's kind of hard to read this and not immediately be like, yeah, fuck those dummies who want to stay on the high, hard ground. You cowards.
Right.
Like, actually, no, like we kind of do need, and there is an important role for the specialists and the technical problems. And I want people applying technical rigor and expertise on the high, hard ground of things that Schon is talking about here. I want to know that my surgery is going to go as planned. My planes are going to stay in the air. My internet's going to stay connected. So like there is a little bit of that just makes me itchy, especially that we're using this as kind of like maybe we're not using it as a rallying cry, but a lot of people hear it as a rallying cry. And I do want to just caveat with, it doesn't have to be either or, guys, but nonetheless, I think the world is so attuned to the former, and the nature of rigor being the application of certain, theories and practices to very controlled settings, that when I first encountered fields that actually treated the muddling through as its own form of rigor, my mind was blown. I was like, oh my God, I'm so glad to know that like this is treated with some level of respect. Things like naturalistic decision making that are like, yeah, you can study how people do things in the lab, but how about out in the real world where you're not in the controlled setting and you're not a grad student like under duress? So anyway, that's my quick thing about that quote that I have to put out there before anybody wants to be like, yeah, if you're going to join the club, you have to join the club knowing that the people who aren't in the club are also valuable collaborators, and not everybody needs to love this quote to hopefully engage with us in this larger discourse.
Well, I wish I had heard this a lot sooner than when you introduced me to it, because it took me a while to find place in this world. I entered it from like it's all academics, and here I am, a quote unquote lowly a practitioner within a large corporate organization trying to do org design work, service design work, and figure out how this plays in. I'm not writing papers on this. I'm not doing deep research on this. I'm not looking for big funding on it. Like I'm just trying to like complete a project and support my team and my org, and I couldn't find place. And then when I was going into some of these conversations, I was really intimidated to ask about the relevance of what I needed, or try to propose that what I was doing was at the same scale or level of importance. And at some point, and I don't remember when this hit me, but I realized that it was probably some of the conversations around praxis. And I realized the importance of that relationship of we need the geologists that are in the labs and reading the books and studying the components at a very academic and level, but we also need miners that understand things by getting their hands dirty. And I'm not comparing myself to a miner. I would last maybe 5 minutes in a mine next to real miners. But we need people out there getting their hands dirty and understanding these things in a tactile way as well. And then we need a better relationship between the two to really make sense of these things.
Yeah. It's interesting that I've not ever really thought deeply about this, but it is reminding me of how much time I spent sort of immersed in the world of, or maybe observing the world of science communication and risk communication, because it's very similar, having nothing to do with anything about systems or complexity science that we're always talking about here. But in my sort of trajectory, I spent a good chunk of time, especially as I was transitioning from previous career stages to, where I'd say now, involved a lengthy stop or phase really immersed in the intersections of human-centered design, or I should really say more like just designerly thinking, and systems and information design, and risk and science communication, because I was kind of braiding together all the things I had done prior to going back to grad school around science, physics, education, learning, design, etc. And so I spent a lot of my time, especially during my master's program, with that as my focus, because it was part of my thesis work, which I know I have alluded to, so I won't spend too much time on the details. But because of that work around applying human-centered design lens to science and risk communication, which also pulled a lot on rhetoric, which I'm noticing is kind of back and having a moment again, which I could not be more excited about. But ultimately, I think there's a dynamic there where there were so many folks who were like, we need the scientists who are in the labs, who are in the field, however you want to think about it, really, really focused in a very specialist way. And yes, in like a reducing way, like reductionism does have a role to play when we need to take something apart to understand the parts. We need them there doing that. But then there is like a chasm to cross. In the world of science communication, they've got various goals. Are they trying to communicate for educational purposes? Are they trying to build literacy? Are they trying to support human decision making? Are they trying to build support and persuasion for attitude change or for behavior change, to engage in practices that we think are good for well-being and health, like wear your seatbelt and get your vaccines? Is it support funding for the sciences? So it becomes a little bit of political persuasion, right? So this is where, of course, rhetoric comes into play. But that sort of like space, for a long time, it felt like it was scientists and communicators, and they were trying to reach across to each other to cross this bridge. And then increasingly, there have been humans who have said, I'm not going to stand over here and just try to stretch, or stand over here and try to stretch. I'm actually going to go stand right here, which has such a tough, we all have identified with this in many, many ways. Everybody that's involved in this stuff, we talk about it all the time. I think people who are drawn to the things we're trying to talk about now are, I actually am just going to stand in this space, which means sometimes I feel like both a scientist and a communicator. Other times, to the scientists, I'm a communicator and not part of the club. And other times I'm a scientist, but why don't you like quit being a nerd and talk like a human? And then there's the, you're neither, you're both. So we've talked a bit about this, about how we feel this way in so many of our communities. I feel that way about being somewhere between academia and industry. Each of them hates me for being too much like the other, but then they love me for translating each other. Same thing with like design and, theory versus practice. So love it.
Kind of that UX 101 sort of transdisciplinary weaver of, you don't want the engineers to try to talk to your customers to explain how a thing works, because they're going to talk to you.
No, I know the trope is true.
The Don Norman sort of core thesis of, yes, if you had the guy who designed, the person that designed the car, to describe how to operate it to the driver, it would probably not go as well as
the nature of the thing and the experience of the thing are not one and the same. But it's interesting as we're talking about this, because it's also kind of pulling up for me the challenge that operating as if we are in that kind of interface, whether we're designing or mediating or we are being the interface, right? These are very different things, but there is also the danger of the fact that we now become the interface or an abstraction layer or et cetera, where if now it's our job to interpret, this needs to come through me and then go here, and this needs to come through me and go here, in which we know
the translator,
that's taken to its extreme. There's a lot of problems there, and it's very counter to what we know is really healthy for collaboration and epistemic justice. And if we believe in the, teachings of, I love the phrase teachings of complexity science lately. It's like the teachings of complexity Jesus. But if we care about things like distributed decision making and disintermediated kind of like information and feedback and such, like literally our existence in that in between space becomes a threat to the very things that we're actually trying to facilitate. So you have to be careful.
That is interesting.
What our role is in that space.
That is interesting. The translation through our own biases is exactly it, but also the affordances that we create by not walking into a room and saying, we're going to talk about epistemic sovereignty, and in a room where everyone just kind of goes blank, as opposed to coming in and saying, let's make space for everyone to tell a story, is a whole different, it's not all that different, but we're making our translation there.
Yeah. Well, and I like that you said you wish you had encountered this quote, and it doesn't even mean to be this quote, but just this sentiment earlier in your journey or life or career or whatever. And I think that's really key. I suspect for people that might be watching us, again, hi to the three of you, or, friends of us and this world, I think that's probably true for many. And I do wish, that's part of why I think that even though there are aspects of the sentiment that give me little bits of itchiness, like to me, it works as a quote rallying cry or a bat signal or a dog whistle or whatever metaphor you want. That I think the more people who could at least just be exposed to the concept of that swampy lowland or the muddling through, and that there is some level of rigor in things other than what people usually think of as rigor, the technical rigor. And so I wish I could drop this quote into like everybody's goodie bag at like age 10 so that everybody gets it earlier in their career, and I appreciate that you mentioned that, because I didn't think about that.
It's something I mention whenever I talk to somebody that's newly interested in this space or feeling a bit of the imposter syndrome or the sort of just rejection from the space, to say like, no, we have place here, and also like this isn't a place of true expertise yet. It's a place for explorers. We're all in the hinterlands at the moment. There's knowledge here without a doubt, but there's plenty of room to explore. There's plenty of open territory, but I'm interested now because we were on a call recently when somebody was very open about, I'm feeling a lot of imposter syndrome right now, and I really wanted to like jump out, and I didn't want to divert the conversation, but I really wanted to jump out and go like, I get that all the time. Still today, I have fluctuations of that, and I think it's actually really healthy. But I'm curious if you still feel that. I'm putting you on the spot.
No, I'm just laughing because this is a weird question, because my answer is no. I've never really felt imposter syndrome, which then you hear about. No, okay, that's a lie. I have. I'll come back to that.
Okay.
But you know how people always say everybody experiences imposter syndrome. The only people who don't are like sociopaths and like narcissistic, like egotistical assholes.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm like, but that's not. I'm not, right, guys, I swear.
Yeah. I'll vouch for that.
I want to talk about this because, I also think we should just right off the bat acknowledge and then set aside the fact that the terminology, the phrasing imposter syndrome has been turned into this thing that we can like weaponize. And it's like, well, you have imposter syndrome, so it's something wrong with you. So here are the tools and things you need to do to fix yourself. And And now there's a whole contingent of people who will march in and say, you just shouldn't use the phrase because it's inherently, whether it's sexist, misogynist, racist, classes, whatever it is, like all of that, fine. Yes, let's put that aside for now. But just the notion that there's a relatively common, if not universal, experience where you feel like you haven't either earned the place that you are currently at, or that you don't really like stack up with the people you are surrounded by, or that like somehow people have not yet really seen the real you. And what I've kind of come to realize through so many conversations about this, especially with my other female friends, it's true for everybody, but there's so much discourse about it in the world for women. But I think there's like a difference between the version of imposter syndrome that almost tilts into like, are you familiar at all with like the concept of people who like the concept of like a fatal flaw, or like people who do research around shame? I'm not going to get into like names because whatever, but the notions of shame,
I know who you're talking about,
what shame does to us, and how, right. And the differences between like shame as like a notion that I am bad versus guilt, which is actually not a bad thing. And blah. And then with that, there's this thing where people, grow up with or develop this notion that there's something about me that's fatally flawed. I think there is some conflation around imposter syndrome, the way that the original researchers who coined that term really meant it, versus now it kind of is this thing that like all of us feel at times like we're, in a room full of people who are just so much smarter or better or cooler or prettier, or like, how did I get here? Somebody somewhere messed up. I don't belong here. And pretty soon they're going to find out about me. Like, so I do not have the experience of feeling like there's some fatal flaw about me and that I'm going to be found out. I have struggled with all of those feelings in my life, like I think anybody has, but I'm grateful for like the early experiences in my life that helped me become a person who feels some level of self-assured and self-confidence-ness in my stuff. Saying that, absolutely, like every room I go into, if I don't actually feel like everyone else has got something that they're smarter at, or that I kind of don't belong here and I'm kind of just winging it, like I kind of seek that out on purpose. So like in a way, to reinforce your point, yes, I absolutely feel that way, but I think I run towards that instead of feeling like I'm worried that I'm going to get found out. And this does go back to some things we talked about previously, including when we did the original Complexity Lounge meetup. There was a question where I remember saying, if there's a place or places in your work or your life where you feel that instinct of either shame or imposter syndrome, like use that as like a really awesome spotlight that's highlighting places where you can go and grow and build confidence. Instead of kind of like trying to hide it away or be worried you're going to get found out, use that as like, oh my God, I feel really uncomfortable when people start talking about computational this or this terminology. I'll never hang. I can't even ask questions because they'll know I don't belong. And then fine, if you're not comfortable asking questions, find some trusted people you can talk to in a one-on-one basis or do some self-directed learning. But you now regret asking about imposter syndrome.
I don't.
I have often struggled with
not
this
at all.
question because I
feel
pressure to say that I feel it more than I do. That's my like confession to the world.
I'm glad you defined that and added the sort of boundaries to that, because I think about it similarly, which is why when I was saying I think it's healthy,
I agree.
I'm similar. I say like I like to jump into the deep end where I can barely touch the bottom, but like I want to be overwhelmed. I want to be around people. I've said that there is the imposter syndrome that is the toxic gaslighting sort of lack of belonging sort of imposter syndrome. And then there's the imposter syndrome of I'm surrounded by really talented people that are causing me to up my game and that are inspiring me and pushing me. That's the one that I am seeking out. And I find that more often than not, but I sort of take for granted my understanding of that. So I'm glad you painted this sort of boundaries around that. There are probably a lot of reasons why I take that for granted.
Kyle. Yeah, I mean, but there's definitely, at this point, it's also just become a phrase where it's so loosey-goosey, fuzzy, that it's hard to think about it. But yeah, and I think, I mean, one of the questions I could hear people saying or thinking to themselves is like, you're telling me you run towards situations where you feel a little in over your head or out of your depth. What the hell is wrong with you guys? Or why do you do that? Because that's not something I feel safe doing. And I think there's such interesting stuff there. It's something I'd actually like to talk to more people about. I know as we have plans to bring some more voices into this, this is something I'd like to hear from others about live in a recorded way, because I do think that it is fair to acknowledge that for some people, it doesn't feel safe to do that. And for any number of reasons. And I think for some people, it truly isn't safe. But I think for more people than realize who think it's not safe to run into those places, actually it is safe. And, if you pull out your teacher speak or whatever, that like, Vygotsky's notion of like zone of proximal development or whatever, you can go into different metaphors, but that's where learning happens. That's where cool things happen. That's where connections happen. That's where those little epiphanies happen. That's where you make really meaningful sparks of relationships, with people. And so those environments, it's like those dumb quotes about like, discomfort is where the learning happens, or ships are safe in harbor, but that's not what ships are for, like that, like that kind of thing. So I feel like an imposter every day of my life because I got dropped into a human body, period. And I'm literally moving through this experience, having a human experience, being like, what the fuck at every turn and just taking it in. But at the other end, I do not experience imposter syndrome the way that many of my colleagues and peers have often related to me, especially folks that I have been in a mentor position to or like a manager, because somewhere along the way, I just reframed that feeling as, oh no, I'm going to get found out, into, holy shit, they let me in this club. Joke's on them. Come on, So like, it's like reframe it rather than try to squash it or solve it.
Yeah. There are a few strings that I wanted to pull on there. I'm going to pick one. Yeah. It's funny to me that the idea of not feeling like an imposter is a signal of being a sociopath, but feeling like the most dominant person in the room, or at least on the level of any room that you can walk into. You can go anywhere and know just as much as everyone else in there. That's normal. That's fine. That's weird to me. I think there's also a very big difference between. I think I've expressed here a few times. I've been intimidated by people, not necessarily because from my own I bring that intimidation into the room.
Yeah.
Not because they necessarily do anything. And it's not an intimidation of like, well, you know, what's going to happen, but like more of a, I don't want to waste the time to ask a dumb question necessarily. I'm getting over that. But
yeah,
there's also a big part of, I'm not going to ask a question because I'm listening. I'm in, like, the time is better spent listening to the questions other people are proposing and listening to the conversation that's happening. Not a humble brag by any means. I had dinner with Dave Snowden and Alicia Uraro one night. I didn't say 2 words through the entire thing. They just went back and forth, and it was amazing. I didn't need to talk. I just needed to listen through that entire thing, and that was not a "I don't belong here" moment. It was a I'm just soaking all of this up, and I'm sure I soaked up like 70% of it because it was just drinking from the fire hose the whole time.
I love that. And think about how, like, one of the things you just said was, like, you weren't sitting there the whole time thinking like, oh my God, I don't belong here.
I don't belong, right?
You know what I mean? If you had done that,
I'm
think of
grateful to
everything
be
you would
here.
have missed, you know, think about how your brain would have been shut off to being able to actually just sit back and soak it in. And I think
Right.
that being able to just keep the, like, you know, the receiving satellite dish, whatever, open and receptive, and like the channels open to receive, is so critical. And the minute that you start to be a little too self-referential and worried about your own status, even though it doesn't come from a place of selfishness, it is inherently self-centered or self-directed, and therefore you close that loop and you're not going to be open to receiving all this amazing stuff that you just notice if you pay attention, not even in amazing conversations over dinner, but literally around you in the world. I do want to pull, we're going to do some like backwards pulling now on things
Let's
because I
go.
want to do the other things, but you mentioned about being a person who could like walk into any room and feel like you're like the most knowledgeable. What's interesting though is like, so I don't ever feel like that. No, that's not.
No. I'm saying that's I think that's weird. The idea that that's a thing.
That's a problem.
That's not me, right?
But I actually think there is a version that isn't so much that I could walk into any room and feel like I kind of know everything or have more knowledge than most. But I do think there is a feeling that is something like I could walk into any room and feel like I can get my bearings, and or having the confidence that I can figure things out.
Sure.
And that is a phrase we've used, or I've used a lot, and I know we've talked a little bit about, but like there is something there that is the difference between maybe the forms of imposter syndrome. But I long ago figured out, and this was in a conversation where someone was just like, what do you do? And I'm like, I figure things out. And then I help other people figure things out. And like, that's kind of how I described myself for a long time. I have confidence that almost any challenge I can get myself into or any environment I can find myself in, regardless of how out of my depth I am, that I can figure out whatever I need to figure out. I don't know how I'll do it, but I have confidence that I will. And it's not just in my own self, but it's in the network of people and other things that I have access to. And just knowing that that adaptation is there and available to me if I just look for it. And I think it's good to know, or to like acknowledge that that's different than status. It's different than feeling like I can have a conversation on the same topics that like Dave and Alicia could have, versus knowing that if they turned to me and said, Kyle, what do you think? Jen, what do you think? I wouldn't panic. I would be like, all right, well, let me share what's going through my head right now and like figure out how to dance through. We all love the dance metaphor, right? Dance through things instead of come in with a prescribed choreography already determined. So there we go. More improvised versus choreography. But I just liked that thread that, you know, you were kind of bringing back to it. So.
And I'll flip that over to the other side. I'm smiling over here because how many workshops, I'm sure you've done this as well. How many workshops have we facilitated? We invite a whole bunch of people. A few people we invite as from the periphery, and they show up and they're going, I'm not sure where I'm here. They're sort of wobbly walking in the door going, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do anything for you. And our answer is like, I don't know either, but I'm glad you're here. I suspect that something cool is going to happen by the fact that you're here. So don't worry about it. Get comfortable. And usually that plays out in an unexpected way, but there's some
Absolutely.
contribution that's like
Absolutely.
something happens that weird intersection is the spark that we needed to move things along.
Absolutely. In fact, a lot of times the folks that are more likely to say that and feel like they're outsiders or they're
Right.
outliers to a conversation, I'm not going to say they're more likely always to be the ones who have something interesting, but more that their
Right.
perspective is an outlier perspective. Therefore, there's some kind of a anomaly or signal that,
Yeah.
like, you know, we can turn our attention to. I also wonder sometimes how much, if someone walks into a setting with that sentiment, how much of it is coming from internalized senses and feelings, and how much of it is also that it's been hammered into you. Your hourly time is worth this much. So if you're going to spend it in this workshop, people are going to question whether that, you know, the dollar amount that gets assigned to 3 hours of your time, like, is it worthwhile? You know, so how much of it is internally emerging and erupting, and how much of it is externally kind of being structurally programmed in? I just want, you know, there's a little bit
We're
of
going
both.
to do a whole series of these conversations on expertise and validation and invalidation and assimilation and organizations. We could go on for hours. Like the new folks coming into, you know, we do this all the time. We hire people, we want fresh eyes. They come in, and the first thing we tell them is don't contribute until you've been properly assimilated. Just read all the documents, be a fly on the wall, absorb, learn the language, and then once they've been sort of accustomed to everything, now you can contribute. But what we really want is what they came with in the door, and we don't give them an opportunity to do that. And I vehemently am opposed to that. That's the person that I want to come in and say,
Sometimes.
show us the thing that we don't see, along with the people that are there that have been staring at it for a long time.
Of course.
We want both of you at the table.
Yeah,
that
and
discourse is exactly what we want.
Exactly. You want those polarizing lenses laid on top of each other to get some cool diffraction patterns. But I also know there are teams that are absolutely hiring people who don't want that perspective. They want you to come in and, you know, be as close to like the robot that was molded by the mold created out of everyone else as possible. So
I was talking to somebody last week who said the phrase to me, social monocropping.
I said, that's good.
Yeah,
whoever you are, whoever coined that, that's a good one.
We're still with the gardening, but man, gold. So yes, the polyculture and the intercropping is what we want. Yeah.
We're still not ready for the rewilding or the wild, throw the wildflower seeds and
the feral elementalism of all this.
There's a house in my neighborhood that has their front yard. So I live in an urban area, but it's a very residential kind of almost suburban feel, but within Boston. And so we've all got little small yards. And then everybody's got like a lawn, you know, a small lawn, except there's a house near that has completely transformed their lawn into a butterfly like garden way station pollinator. You're probably familiar. Some of our listeners probably have familiarity, right? If not, you should Google it. It's super cool. But it's basically just a bunch of native plants that require relatively little tending to, other than just, you know, in the off season, and they just grow all summer, and they're built to provide cover and food and protection for various pollinators and birds and such. So it's awesome. And every time I walk by that yard, I'm like, I want to do this to my yard. I want my yard to be in that state because it's such a naturally rebalancing, you know, ecosystem of all the right feedback loops and constraints, and everything is just in balance, even though it's changing. It's dynamic equilibrium, right? Not static. And I think about how my yard, which is this little plot out front that I still cut and then water. I don't actually water it, but, you know, it gets watered by the rain. And then, you know, I put some overseed down in the fall. But I want to move from where my yard is now to that butterfly garden, pollinator garden setup. And I just, every time I walk my dogs by that yard, the irony is so present that I kind of can't really get over the hump. And I don't know if it's inertia. I don't know if it's just that I don't want to spend the energy right now to research how to do it or to pay someone to do it. I know the woman who lives in that house actually does something like that for a living. One of these days, I'm just going to call a little number on her sign and be like, come help me do this to my yard.
Yeah.
I know this would take relatively little investment from a time or energy perspective. But it's not lost on me, the irony that I spend so much time working and talking with others, and yet here in my own life there's this little microcosm of an example where I can see this kind of equilibrium and its potential, but I am in a state where I can't figure out how to get from this to that. I want to rewild my yard. How can I talk to people about rewilding their organization or rewilding their leadership spot? I can't even rewild my tiny little plot of grass. And so I do reflect on the things that might prevent Jen from taking the little bit of energy leap to initiate that process for my own yard. And then the parallels with things that, are the people I collaborate with. So I find that rich. That's rich.
This is something that sort of haunts me, in that
spoken like ChatGPT. Have you noticed that that's a phrase that shows up in a lot of LLM writing?
No, I have not.
I mean, it is, but don't worry. I know
it's ChatGPT is haunted.
It does use the phrase like in writing that I know people have done with LLMs. There'll be like a spot where they're like, this is what haunts me, or this is what gets me, or and this is what really holds me back, or whatever. Like there's like it's a single line that's like, and here's what really gets me. Like humans say that. We've all been writing that way for ages. It's not like, but it's definitely everywhere right now. And I've seen but here's what haunts me. And I'm like,
interesting.
Anyway, what haunts you, Kyle?
All right, I'm gonna have to rethink that.
Kyle GPT.
Yeah. Oh, that's scary. The sort of that sort of push to yes, how do I sort of reframe some of these, or how do I enact some of these things in my life that is reflective of these values that independently may have an impact or not, largely may or may not have some sort of value, may actually, more likely, is probably pretty futile on a grander scale, requires a bit of energy, takes my energy away from other things that might be short-term rewards, healthy or not, most likely not. How do I not stay complicit with the things that are where the assemblage is and the momentum is at the moment, like all of that sort of stuff? How do you sort of divert from this sort of just the reward systems?
Well, the machine, like we've talked about it, the machine is rolling. So yeah. Well, I mean, I will say this, and this again, continue this as a metaphor, folks. So nobody really cares about my yard, but you get the metaphor. But I have talked to Brian about this, my husband, and the notion of converting our front yard, which is probably like 900 square feet, it's little, into like a full on crazy rewilded thing. We'll do eventually. I know we will. But I got like on that topic at one point and I was like, and he's like, yeah, but look at our backyard. We've done it in little patches. Our backyard will never do this to the whole thing because we want to have the lawn sort of available for dogs to run around in. But in the back corner of our yard, which is fenced in, at some point we started just throwing brush back there, like temporarily, like when we would, rake up leaves or something, small branches fall from trees. And then eventually we made a point to leave it. And then we had a small tree in our backyard that had died, and then the trunk remained and slowly rotted, and eventually pieces fell until the whole thing fell over. And we decided to just roll it into that corner. And so now, several years on, that corner of our backyard has become a small patch of completely rewilded whatever. It's not beautiful flowering plants where the butterflies go from like an aesthetic perspective, but it is providing lots of home for bugs, lots of food for birds. We put a little bird bath sitting back there too, so there's water for the birds. I don't put feeders out because I'd rather have them eating natural food. But and then the other corner of the yard, we threw a bunch of wild seed down, and now this year I did a little research, and in the spring I'm going to plant a couple shrubs that fruit with some berries for birds, for some of the native species. And I don't think about that stuff because I'm too busy thinking about how I want my front yard to be this incredibly, overwhelmingly beautiful, but also super cool and hip, rewilded front yard. Meanwhile, in my backyard, I've done these things that have just been as part of like the natural flow of the energy of whatever I've been up to, working with the energy of the system, right? Finding these places where it just made sense to do this thing A or thing B as things unfolded organically in the, time that passed over the time we lived in this house. And yet I look back there and I go, oh, we've actually rewilded that tiny corner, and that tiny corner's in the direction, headed in that direction too. So I think for folks who are hopefully picking up on the metaphor here, to your point, Kyle, there is that always present tension about the aspirational future that in a meta way is an aspirationally rewilded future, but that there is also something to be said for small places or opportunities for that prefigurative work, right? Like being and living the future or the different thing, even if it's inside some kind of boundary or within a small contained space, both as an experiment, but also to kind of live through these different like alternative or contested kind of futures. In this case, I'm not really thinking about the back corner of my backyard as like a small prefigurative experiment in rewilding a yard, but that's what it ended up being. And so where is that existing for all of you, everybody else who listens in your work, in your life, day to day? You probably have more examples like that than you realize.
It's small moves. We're always talking about small moves. We need to eat our own dog food, not just do the small moves, but acknowledge that there is, even if we're not able to measure the value or the impact of the small moves, we know that they are having some resonance and impact, whether we're able to see what that impact is. We are participants in it. I don't remember why I was in this conversation recently, but tell me if I've got this right. Correct me where I'm off here, because you might know more about this. The Socrates story of the villagers telling him he's the wisest man on earth, and him saying, that's interesting, let me go find out, going to every village, and that's an ideal scenario. That's what we should all like aspire to, is being on the quest, not at the resting point of and for everyone that hasn't heard this, he goes to every village and says, I heard that I'm the wisest man on earth, and asks the wise man of each village, and each village wise man says, no, it's me. He says, okay. And then he finally, is it Zeus that he comes to in the very end or something along those lines?
I've heard variations of this. I don't know what the original story is.
Okay.
I know the story, and I've just not done, and I don't know the history of the actual myth. So.
Right. I don't know the core of it either, but I appreciate the sentiment of the story. When he gets to Zeus and says, I'm finally coming to you. I've met every wise man on earth at this point, and they've all said they're the wisest ones. And I'm trying to figure out what's the answer. And Zeus says, it's you, because you haven't stopped your journey. And that's the I am wise because I know nothing sort of relationship there. Anyway, and I was correlating that to the end of Schindler's List. What a weird leap. Sorry, this is not morbid, I promise. But the Edward the when Schindler sort of collapses and realizes, like, I wish I had gotten more. Like, and it's like the response of like, well, look at the massive list, like, look at all the lives saved. The thing that is not afforded in those small moves that we have to find a way to afford ourselves is those resting points.
Yeah.
To kind of say, like, all right, like, there's not a futility here. There's nothing happening.
Yeah.
Like, because we have to stay motivated through all of this. Yeah. Not necessarily, again, not a sort of like, okay, I've arrived moment.
Yeah.
But also not a like, through those small moves of doing things that don't have an immediate reward or response, how do we keep ourselves energized through all of this? That's what I've been thinking about a lot.
It's a powerful example too from Schindler's List that you use. I think that's really, really, really important in a way that I do not think people often even let themselves acknowledge, because so much work, especially work that people consider purpose or mission driven. Which I don't even know what those phrases mean anymore, but you know what I'm talking about. But there's so much in that world and in the culture around it, especially nonprofit and social and civic, work that hopefully it's also civil, who knows. There's like the pressure to just always acknowledge that there's always more to be done. And if you were to pause, there's like, well, what are you doing? Don't rest on your laurels. And you do hear people get some level of lip service to, we should pause and celebrate our achievements and celebrate our wins, or like, let's take in this really powerful narrative about, this family that we helped. But or I think a lot about how I get so much mail from various places that I've donated to for animal rights. And here's a picture of this dog that got this surgery and now is, or it's this child in some third world country. And I think the spirit is there, but that stuff just doesn't land in the way that you're talking about. And I think this is something that we all shared collectively need to work on in our practice, and figuring out how to do both, acknowledging there's always more growing to do, but how to pause and look around at where you are now compared to where you were, or to see some level of impact from previous actions in a way that can provide both that rest, but also that fuel for whatever comes next. I really think too that like this is less about a practice and it's more about the people that you surround yourself with and the people that you interact with. Because when I think about who in my life or where in my life the Schindler's List moment, we'll start calling it that. Where does that happen and how is that supported? It isn't about a process or a ritual that I have somewhere. It could be for others, but it isn't, because I do X or because somebody has said, let's pull up and stop to celebrate this. It's in very, like I say, organic and unplanned moments and ways that someone will be like, Jen, shut up for a second and let's talk about all the blah, 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 like they did in Schindler's List, right? So having the retrospective or the all hands or the meeting or the ritual where we call out a couple things we're either grateful for, or we appreciate or whatever, or stop to look at the fact that part of your backyard is already rewilded, Jen, doesn't happen because it's planned into the practice. I think it's a muscle that you have to grow with other people and be doing for each other. So somebody in my life, and my example of the backyard, usually it's my husband being like, while you're despairing about XYZ, like hold up, back the fuck up. And remember this, look at this now compared to what it was. Or in other small places where in a more professional sort of context, oh, you didn't achieve XYZ thing, or you haven't figured that out yet. But what about this other thing that you did that actually had this interesting impact? And now that's off and running. And we're all so good at being like, yeah, well, that's done. I'm not worried about that anymore, Yes. But I really appreciate you calling this out, because I think this is really, really critical to any kind of practice that is meant to keep things in motion and understand the like evolutionary nature of a lot of systems oriented work. There isn't going to be an outcome that when you hit it, you hit it and you're done. It's always in movement, always dynamic equilibrium.
All right. Yeah. And I think there's two things that I'm pulling from what you were just saying. One, I mean, also we need to think about things in terms of like multi-generational change. Not just what can we see if we pause. If we have weekly stand-ups, what can we notice in a weekly? It's far beyond what we will experience in our lifetime is what we should be participants in. But the other is I heard Dave Snowden mention recently the term flipping the heuristic. And it's hearing that put a name to a thing I've been doing with my kids that has been, it started as an experiment and it worked. I don't even know why I said it. It was just one of those like in the moment thing. But like when they start fighting, when you've got siblings, when our parents, when we were fighting with our siblings, they were like, all right, you go over there and you go over there and knock it off. And then like things didn't get resolved, or they like, go work it out, figure it out. Okay, well, I don't have those kind of skills. I'm like 6. How am I supposed? One of us is going to overpower the other. That's how that works. I'm the oldest. I'll figure it out. They were recently fighting over like who's drawing who something and then insulting each other over this. And they're 6 and 4, and now they're insulting each other's pictures that they're drawing. And I said, hold on a second. Rather than saying break it up, I said, find some. Rowan, you say something nice about your sister's drawing. Sorella, you say something nice about your brother's drawing. And they said the sweetest things about each other's drawings. It was amazing. And then there was peace somehow. And I've done this a few times now. And it worked. How it worked, it just worked.
When they're just like, "Shut up, Dad! No way."
Oh, it'll happen. The more I hit those sort of things, the faster it's going to come. They're gonna figure me out.
Yeah, you're gonna ultimately create hyper learning machines that have shortened every feedback loop. That you'll not have anything that works by the time they're 10.
Oh, they are going to figure out the shortcuts of my system.
But I do like that. I think that's really relevant, and I think that's like part of. Well, I was like trying to figure out how to articulate it, but I think that there's something there that isn't just, oh, I'm having a bad, sad, mad day.
Yeah.
Let me write down 3 things in my gratitude journal. Like things like that can be flattened into a ritual that's actually lost any meaning.
Right.
And I do know that practice actually works, even when you don't want to do it. Like you force yourself in like a mad state of mind. All right, I'll name 3 things I'm thankful for.
Yes,
it still does work. But I think there's something different about it being a repeatable. I guess what I'm trying to get at. Wish I had figured this out 5 minutes ago. I think there's a difference between context independent practices, rituals, habits. Like have a gratitude journal, and when you're feeling this way, write in it, versus context dependent things you might do in the moment. Sorry, this is bugging here. That you see it on the camera at this point? My God.
I don't.
Back it up. There are context dependent things that you can do, adopt, figure out in that context that achieve the end in what I think can be a more powerful way. So Schindler's List, great example. Your kid's drawing, great example. And I think Brian in the yard, great example. Places in my life where I've also seen this are like I say, like at work, it's not we did a thing and now we paused up to see, but it's more in the moment to realize I spend a lot of my energy looking, quote, forward. This is me speaking as anybody.
Yeah. Because the list of things we have to do, ever growing.
Exactly. And I think it's easy for people to also be like, well, let's pause and look back and see if we look on the road behind us, all the people we helped on the road behind us. But what we're really talking about is stop, look around you now.
Yeah.
Now I'm singing like Rush lyrics. We don't need to do that. But like, look around. Time stands still. Okay. But there's very much, Cal's like, I have no idea. I think there's something there. I don't know what it is, but it's interesting. This is where our conversation has brought us, because it's definitely sort of seemed like it's been in the zeitgeist a little bit too for people right now. I don't know if you're feeling that.
Definitely in these conversations. Both of these, like, where's my place in this, and how do I stay motivated through all of this? Just the shitification of everything. Yeah. This might be one of the reasons why I really like the ideal present practice, that canvas. I've used this a lot, and it really starts with for anyone not familiar with this, what is the current state of what we're experiencing, and then you kind of split it into, I think this is good versus I think this is bad. I don't love the dichotomy of that necessarily, but it is easy to get your hands on, and then it sorts itself out a little bit easier later. Then you move into 2 frames of, well, in the future, what's the trajectory of the good and the bad? Where does the good, if we amplify that, where does that take this? And what's the nightmare scenario if the bad keeps getting worse? Yeah. And then in our time frame that we've allotted ourselves, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, what can we do to aim towards the good and avoid the bad? And that's a commitment. What can we do within our own agency during this time? Yeah. And then walk out of the room and address that. Yeah. What's amazing, though, is when you do this on a regular cadence, you can kind of see over time, not just a retrospective of like, oh, that's what it looked like before, but you get to see how our current state actually looks today versus the current state 3 months ago. Yeah. And how we're reflecting, or how we're telling stories about what we're in today versus then. And it's not the same as that sort of that gratitude journal. You're right, but it is and I'm complaining about things in a very different way now.
Mhm.
I'm understanding things in a different way. I'm the future I was proposing was full of a lot of hyperbole before. It's a
Yeah.
little bit sharper now, and it's a
Yes.
little bit more sober, and it's a little now it's true. Sort of, there's a different degree of risk analysis on it, and or maybe not. Maybe it's
Yeah.
clearer, but it's much more terrifying because we understand whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like it shows it's again it is context specific, and that there's a everyone that I've brought through that process has looked at that and said, like, this is a big problem with design being able to show value, because we don't know how to tell our story. We don't have good metrics around stuff unless
Yeah.
we're doing conversion rates or NPS or something ridiculous like this. But
Yeah.
not that that's purely ridiculous. There are a few people that are tasked with that, but so many of us that don't have a good story. But this tells a story of a place that we were once. We took action, we had
Yeah.
interventions, and this is the place that we are now because action was taken, and it's different, and it's
Mhm.
ideally better. It's agreeably better, hopefully.
Sometimes I don't even know if it needs to be better anymore. I think it
Right?
just needs to be different because right now we
Sure.
don't even show that. So hearing you
Mm,
describe this, is also just kind of like reinforcing that I think for a lot of people who might try an activity like that, one of the most important pieces is don't just do it once. Do it,
right.
agree in advance to do
Yeah.
it every X weeks, months, whatever, because only then can you actually see if there's a change. And too
Mm,
many times when you start to emphasize we need a baseline, then the baseline is
right.
going to be so we can reach a certain amount of difference from here to there. But I truly encourage anybody to think about, like, what would it mean to actually just measure and not create targets? Like,
Oh yeah.
literally just take the temperature, but only to see what the temperature is. And then if you have a temperature chart over the course of a year, think about all the things that can
Mm,
show you that could be very interesting to analyze together, that isn't just
yeah.
based on I'm taking the temperature so I can raise it 3 degrees, right?
Right.
So, the few times I've actually done the ideal future present exercise, I keep
Hmm.
saying that too, correct me.
Hmm.
The ideal present
Right.
um, activity that I've done, and I've done a couple variations with it. One of the other things I've found really nice though is that people don't just go, okay, here's what we like about the present, and you get
Right.
very obvious. All the things that are good today are going to lead to even better things in the future, or all the things that are
Yeah.
kind of bad today are going to obviously lead to all these bad things. So how do we, if that's not how it unfolds usually. It's much more nuanced and complicated, and
Yeah.
interesting things emerge. And so then if you've agreed to keep doing it, it allows you to see difference, which now
Oh
I
yeah.
feel like we have to have a Bateson quote about difference that makes a difference. But like
That's
that's what
right.
you need. That's what you need,
Yes.
is to see difference or change. And I think a lot of designers who get really caught up in, forget about ROI, but like just being able to tell the story of what your work has done and where you've
Hmm.
actually made an impact, is start by being able to show a difference from
Right.
current to future state. Just show that. You can't show that if you don't start actually figuring out where you are now in a way that you can tell a story that has changed.
Yeah. One of my favorite ahas that I get from it is when people put things in the bad space, and I'm looking at that and going,
Yeah.
why are we complaining about this? And then I see them carry that into what that becomes in the future.
Yeah.
I get to understand what their true fear is, why they're
Yes.
concerned about that at a
Yeah.
different level.
Yep.
And now I see it from another dimension, really. And now I can address it. Now I can speak to it differently. Like, people aren't responding to emails fast enough. Who cares?
Yeah. Why is
That
that bad?
might lead
Oh,
to
yeah.
oh shit.
Yep.
I can see where that might
Yes.
throw things off.
Yes.
Okay. So
It really helps
it
people understand where they are constantly always projecting into the future and don't even realize
right.
they're doing it. And to interrogate where they
Yeah.
can and can't, stop doing it.
Yeah. I will say, if you're going to go into this also, for again our 3 to 10 listeners, thank you. If you are going to try this with a seasoned team, I've made this mistake. It's worth doing. But what should be an hour-long exercise was about a 4-hour exercise,
Yeah.
and we opened the floodgate. You kind of have to do that. It is a group therapy session. Everyone's going to tell you everything that they've wanted to say all this time, and then you have to sort it out and still make it a practice. It will refine itself over time.
Yeah.
If you do this with a brand new team, that's really great, but it's going to be pretty sparse because people don't really know what the new situation is, and they don't know how to trust each other and what to talk about. But still, stick with it and just go. So the real answer at the end of the day is just go. The first couple sessions will feel like, I don't know if this actually worked. It'll be interesting, but I don't know if it worked. Stick with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that. And look up like Jay Bloom and Ben Mosier. They're the ones that
I was gonna say we should give them like, so if people want to go Google it, I think if you Google Jay Bloom, you'll find it, or just hit us up.
And then nudge him to come, and the two of them to come talk to us.
Yeah, we need to actually get them on our. I think they also, there's some interesting intersections between some of what that kind of an exercise does in contrast with / comparison to, say, like side casting activities, the like impossibly good and impossibly bad sort of like I think it's Knevin that's the version I've seen the most. Instead of like future backcasting, sort of creating the trajectory from the past that leads to these things and then looking at where the different departure points were. I find it really interesting to do things like that with the same group, not always in the same session, and then actually ask them to like compare what these similar but subtly different exercises achieve, like getting to that meta level of, okay, but this was more comfortable for me because this is more like what we've done in workshops before, versus this was a little weird and I didn't like it as much, but now that I'm talking about it, I realized this actually made us, reconcile some things we hadn't reconciled. Doing activities, I say this because whenever I hear I have this mental tick where when I hear of an activity or a tool or a framework, my brain literally does the Rolodex shuffle and it thinks of all the other, like, see also, :
Right.
So my brain thinks of the other 6 things that it has filed in that little semantic web nearby.
Yep.
I'm not about to blab them out because I've learned people don't want to hear that. but I do that naturally. And then I think the instinct often is pick the one out of that category that applies to your need. And I actually think, as a counter story to that, sometimes there's actually some really awesome power to doing multiple things that are supposed to all be achieving the same end. And why would you take 3 different routes to the same place? Man, taking 3 different routes to the same destination is sometimes really awesome. Think about all the things you learn. Think about all the things you see. Think about all the insights you can gain and how you can compare those different perspectives. Can you usually get buy-in to do that like in a corporate workshop over the course of a day? No, but like there are ways to kind of filter that in over time. So highly recommend for those who are in the role of facilitating things of this sort, definitely fight that instinct to like.
I was going to say, how many category exercises are in the like Stanford, the D School design thinking sketching workbook of like how to build something, how to rapid prototype multiple things, again, multiple ways to get to the same thing.
I don't even, does that exist? Is that a thing? Is there a workbook?
Oh yeah, it's ton, like the Crazy 8 style stuff.
Well, that's the thing, is there's not even like one tome to rule them all. Like, I actually struggle with that question, interestingly, that we're talking about this. Somebody asked me about it the other day when people were like, where can I find like a list or like a menu of like different activities and when to do what? And when is this activity good for this and that and such? And I totally get, I kind of wish, hold on a second. There is a huge male deer walking down my street right now. And I have to like look at it.
In the middle of Boston.
Yeah, I hope he's okay.
Wow.
He's got a huge rack. He's really...
Wow.
Don't let me lose my train of thought. I'm talking about menus of activities. We can cut this.
Yeah.
Hopefully he finds out where he's going. I'm surprised my dogs didn't go crazy. Anyway, so let's see. I will cut some of that. Anyway, done marveling after the like exposure to beautiful nature that we just had. I do get requests from time to time about like, I want a menu of activities, and I kind of on one hand wish there was like this great huge reference book, that I don't actually really wish that at all. And I think that there being these different people who then create different collections for different use cases and from different angles, I think that's, to me, far, far, far more useful and it's rich and generative to have to kind of go hunting for things. But I do know that that is tough for people, especially when they're just getting started figuring out how to facilitate any kind of group collaboration. So when you even mentioned like the D School book, I was like, look, I'm familiar with the D School and everything and all their influence. I didn't know there was like a book. I actually am mostly familiar with the Carnegie Mellon universe, so I know a few books that came out of that world, and those are great, and I recommend them. But
I mentioned book more in a reductive sort of like they built their handbook of tools.
Well,
but
and everyone's got their toolkits and their card sets,
exactly
their list of methods. The one thing I always appreciated, so Luma, Pittsburgh-based company, obviously some CMU ties, otherwise I wouldn't have heard of them. Blah blah blah. But Luma was actually a spin out of Maya, who is another small agency that was a bunch of CMU people, and they did their own toolkit, card set, whatever. They listed a bunch of methods. They did 3 categories. I forget even what they are. I think it's like look, listen, design. I forget. That's not right. But ultimately it's like your 3-step design process instead of the 4 or the 5 or whatever.
This sounds familiar.
But what I appreciated about their list of activities is that they have the card set, but then they also just put them in a book. And I was like, thank you for acknowledging that we are literally just listing things on a menu, like a buffet, appetizer, entree, dessert, pick 2 here, pick 3 from there. I do get really itchy about the ones that are like, first do one of these, then do one of those, then do one of these. And it's more like, just in these scenarios, this could be useful. In this scenario, this could be useful, but they could also go this way, and there are some books that just list all these. And there's also collections that come from different schools, liberating structures or various dialogic methods. And anyway, we're now down a rabbit hole we don't need to beat out. But
I have friends that are hobbyist carpenters. They do a lot of woodworking, and I overhear their conversations, and half of it might as well be another language altogether for me. But their back and forth is like, what tool did you use for this? What method? What jig did you? And we're in the complicated space. There's no right answer. It was just, this is what I used. There's a reason why I used this. I had a couple options. My options were limited because it was the relationship between the tool and the material and the intent that I was going towards. And so that meant that I'm not going to cut this thing with a chainsaw. But, or I mean, I could have, but it wouldn't have come out this way. It wouldn't have matched my intent. But that's kind of how when I say toolbox, that's how I usually think about this stuff, is like, or the doctor's bag, is you're kind of going, well, we could go with any of these. I try to think about the language that the people I'm working with are using, and then pop out something that is going to be familiar with them or their level of engagement. Like, I can do if they want to do a 2-day workshop, then I'm going to bust out something that can support a 2-day workshop. If they want an hour-long work session, then I'm going to bring out something that's got 4 frames, like the Ideal Present or something like that. I can accomplish similar outcomes. I just have to kind of match the context. That's all.
Yeah, but you say that like it's no small feat, and I think that comes from years of practice. You and I can talk about like, just pick the right thing that's fit for the context and the use case, but that's because you've got a giant carpenter toolbox full of random things and drill bits and jigs and saws and such, and that because you're not following a code. I think there's a difference here in that, and you made the point, if you think about like Kinevin or whatever, in a complicated system, there are good practices, maybe not best universal, but good, versus in like complex, you've got emergent or exaptive or whatever you want to say. But if you're golfing, I don't golf, so I'm making up what I've heard about golf.
Okay.
But when you're golfing, isn't it such that like you're at a certain point, you're at this distance from the hole, and you pick, and you might not. There might not be one choice of club.
Sure.
But there's like, okay, I'm either going to use a this or a that, There's
some guidance to it.
But you're probably still going to pick a driver versus like, some other form based on.
Sure.
So that to me is what I think a lot of people think that workshop or facilitation is all about, which is, okay, I am now putting. So I know I need to use my putter. Okay, now I'm driving. I need to use a driver. Okay, here I'm in like a 9-iron or whatever space. And I actually think for a lot of, like we've talked about, the more complex scenarios we might be facilitating within, part of the work is just getting people out of that entire way of thinking to know that this isn't have, the knowledge of when to use what club. And it's like, you have to get the ball from here to over there. You could use clubs, or you could blow on it, or you could go kick it, or you know what I mean? It's suddenly
Right.
like any tool you have available is actually fair game. So when you and I joke about like, oh yes, we can make our work, methods work for an hour or a 2-day workshop. Oh yes, it's so easy.
Yeah.
Just fit it to the context. It's because of the
Yes.
beautiful flexibility of the tools and the methods. Also, it's because you and I have played a lot of golf metaphorically. We've had to kick a lot of balls, a lot of directions, and you've got a huge repertoire of tools that you don't start with. You muddle through in the beginning and you pick up over time. And so that's one of the reasons I'm always such a broken record about like the more you're experimenting, the more you're playing, and the more you're failing, the risky play, the more tools you're picking up literally along the way, so that when somebody goes, get the ball from here and in the hole, but you're not allowed to use a golf club, which is like what so much of corporate work is, right? Achieve this goal, but you can't do the actual thing that would be the easiest route to actually achieve the thing. You don't have to stand there and be mad that you have to throw your golf clubs away, but you can just go, okay, I have some other weird contraption to get the ball in the hole. So that was the most meandering and like unhinged metaphorical journey that I think we've had yet. Sorry, everyone.
That was a good one. Yeah. And this has been a point of mine for a while, is we just have to get into the practice. We just have to do. Because we're going to figure out what doesn't resonate, how things don't fit, what things are not good for a lot faster than we figure out what fits. And again, once it fits in one context, it's not going to fit in the next. So we're not going to crack that code. But it's the classic Snowden of more chefs, not recipe followers. And the amount of time, I can't make a souffle, but if I wanted to start figuring it out now, I'm going to burn and destroy a lot of souffles before I get that first, before I become good at souffles.
Why is souffle your go-to on this one so much? What is it about a souffle?
My understanding is there's a bit of technique to it.
Okay.
It's not just measurement. There is a bit of it's I'll put it in cocktail terms. A daiquiri. Daiquiri has to be shaken a particular way for it to balance correctly. I've made a lot of bad daiquiris, and now I can make good daiquiris. But you have to get your shake right. You have to get your mix right. You have to know your stuff. It's not just Black Sabbath. To be able to play Black Sabbath on guitar, the music looks simple, but there is style and technique to it that makes it Black Sabbath. Otherwise, it sounds like MIDI playback on an old 90s sound card.
Yep. That's why I asked, because I knew there was more to than just you might like souffle.
I don't know if I don't know if I really like souffle very much, but from a distance. Now I'm going to use Black Sabbath going forward. I'm going to walk away from souffle because Black Sabbath, I know.
Well, I think I think most people, there's something they've learned to do that you had to do bad before you could do good, like we've said a million times. But, now ask yourself, how does that map to something you're beating your head against the wall at in the work setting, which is often the interest of folks who are probably listening to this, right? Where is that happening? So I don't know. It'd be cool to hear.
And that brings us back to pause. How often do we really sit down and say, man, I remember when I was really bad at this.
Yep.
I have those conversations with my son all the time because he wants to sit down and do something where we talk about not yet. Because he wants to do something, he can't do it yet. He's not big enough. He's not strong enough. He wants to draw a dog and it doesn't look like a dog, and he's so frustrated. And I'm like, remember when you couldn't whistle? Now you're whistling. And remember how long it took you to figure out how to whistle? Keep practicing. Let's go.
I can't whistle. He's ahead of me.
Really? Keep practicing.
But I don't really. Actually, my version of that is snapping. I ever told you I can't really snap? I think we've talked about this.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I've never been able to really just snap on command, even as a kid. Like I just couldn't really, and then as an adult, like a couple of years ago, a friend of mine just became obsessed with like, why can't you snap? And I was like, I don't know, so let's work on it. And I did some research and her husband actually, because he plays guitar, he knows a lot about like hand exercises and mobility. And we were chatting one time and he was like, well, you don't seem to have the kind of, your fingers don't create the cavity, because a snap is, you're basically banging your finger down and then the sound waves are bouncing around inside your hand, and that resonant chamber, creates the noise. And like, for me, there were two things: realizing that like the pressure with which this finger has to come down, I don't get enough friction here for this to hit hard enough, and I can't create the chamber. Now, I enjoyed like thinking through the science of it.
Right.
Me and him bonded over that. She was just like, just fucking practice. But what ended up happening was the combination of the two helped me figure it out. And if I have enough friction, if I put some like dry material, if I've got something on, like gymnasts use like chalk, I'm not going to put chalk on.
Yeah, I was going to say, you have to use some talcum powder to
something on there,
snap.
Grip aids if you're engaged in various aerial arts, like, which I do for fun. So like the grip aids that I use actually help. I'll have friction on my fingers and it'll make it so that I can actually get it, because you can see I can't even really do it now. But and then I figured out how to like put these fingers in a different spot. So on like a good day, I'm not going to get it here. This is really embarrassing. No, this doesn't count. I want like a proper snap. Hold on.
I'm hearing it.
This is okay, but it's not great. Anyway, point is though, I got to a point where I was like, okay, I figured out what's holding me back and I can snap. And there was just like, immediately I was like, who cares now? And then, being like, but think about the journey you went on to get there. And when you talk about the not yet, I just think about Tony Horton of P90X. Were you ever a P90X person?
No, but my wife bought all of those DVDs, and I think she turned them on once or twice and was like, why did I do this to myself?
No, it was never even really like, so I was never really into that world at all. I never bought any other kind of workout DVDs or anything, but I remember, because I was lifting, I lift weights and I was lifting pretty heavy. I was doing Olympic lifting at the time that stuff got big. And I was just so intrigued by everyone talking about how crazy it was. And I'm like, how crazy is this? And it turns out like not that crazy, but nonetheless, Tony Horton, the like guy, his personality just rubs a lot of people the wrong way, but he has these phrases that he would say during these sessions. And one of them really sticks with me to this day. My husband and I will joke about them. There's a few actually, but one of them is like, I can't yet. I presently struggle with. And like, he would do this really over the top, like modeling of exactly what you're talking about. And it's in places besides parenting or complexity practice or whatever. It's in Tony Horton and P90X. But I think it's so easy to dismiss that as trite, or you're just trying to like, don't be so hard on yourself. Look how far you've come. But I don't think these are just therapeutic, self-serving kind of practices. I think they're really critical to keep you in a prefigurative state of mind so that you can keep actually trying to engage that future, emergent thing you want to see happen and be able to keep working on it. I don't know. That's all. Yeah.
No, and I think that whole like it's part of that definition of self that is not. It can't be just in the absence of. It has to be the combination of both, the inventory of what is, as well as the exterior, which is fine. There will always be that.
Yeah. Well, this was an interesting windy one. We didn't even get to like half the things that I looked at earlier, and I was like, ooh, maybe we'll talk about these. So we'll put them on the list for next time.
We've got plenty of content for more of these.
Lots more to come.
Excellent.
All right.